You're listening to Solihull Radio.
Thank you very much for downloading this featured content podcast via Solihull Radio and Red Shoe Media. I am joined today by a very well-travelled man. He's laughing at me already. For this particular podcast, this is our introductory podcast to travel and consumer rights and lots of different things in terms of campaigning. Well, I am incredibly honoured to be joined by Frank Brehany. He is Birmingham born, but the media spotlight grabbed him after a little while. He was down to London. You may have heard him on lots of different radio shows, radio stations, lots of filming, being the go-to person for advice and guidance on travel, consumer rights, and moving into a wider spectrum of actually general public consumer rights as well. Frank, thanks for joining us.
Not at all, Geoff. Great to be here.
Excellent stuff. So tell us a little bit about your background and what brings you into Solihull Radio today. I know we're going to have a bit of a chat about your life and career and what you do and how you help other people.
Well, I'm here today primarily because I'm interested in radio. Over the last 10 years or so, I've kind of slowly been captured by the allure of the studio. But also it's about getting out there, getting the voice out there, getting people to understand that there is a great deal of information for them out there to tap into, but often as not, they don't know how to get there. And I find that radio is a fantastic way to get that message across.
Absolutely. It's probably one of the most intimate media, isn't it? Because if somebody is lending you their ear, that's pretty much
And I find this with phone-ins. I can really get under the skin of some of the problems and the complaints that they have. It's an absolute joy actually to have, and quite funny sometimes, to have the conversations that you have with people on air, but to go away when the mic switches off, to go away knowing that you've actually helped somebody. Yeah, and I think that's the big kick.
I agree with you, actually. And having that feeling of, right, I've made a difference to that person, even if it's just one person on a phone-in, there may be 10 people in the same situation that they're going to be finding, right, I need to go to this website, I need to speak to this person.
And that's the way it's always been with me. If you look at my working history, I started my young life in work as a police officer in the centre of Birmingham, then became a lawyer, and now I'm doing what I'm doing as a consumer campaigner, commentator. And right from the very early days, my real desire, if you look at my work history, is to help people. So I've always had that kick. I've always had that. If you like, it's my drug of satisfaction.
That's right. Yeah. People get their energy in different ways, don't they? And yours happens to be, your energy comes from seeing the benefit to others and you providing that benefit using your skill set that you obviously have developed over the years of being a police officer into being in the legal profession and now, like you say, a commentator.
About talking.
Of course.
Apparently I'm very good at talking.
So
they say.
I don't disagree with you, Frank. I am so pleased that you made the journey into Solihull Radio today because I'd really like to tap into some of your knowledge and your experiences and some of the examples that you've come away with over your career, spanning over your career. Tell us a little bit about the move between becoming into that lawyer profession and then coming out and saying, right, hold on a second, I'm going to help you like this and we're going to use the media to do it and you're not just going to call into my law firm or whatever.
Right, okay.
How did that work?
Well, it really happened. As I say, a few minutes ago, I used to be a police officer.
Sure.
And then, like it happens sometimes, I suffered with an assault and I had to be pensioned out of the police.
Okay.
So then I went back to school, became a lawyer after I got my qualifications. And it was actually, what was the interesting thing? Whilst I was a lawyer, I was doing commentary work for local TV stations and radio stations on some of the cases that I was dealing with. So they could be involved with clinical negligence or human rights issues. But the real game changer was back in 2003. And I think this is something you don't know, Geoff, but in 2003 there was a lady who lived over in Castle Bromwich, so within your listenership area.
Yep.
And she was the owner of an organisation called Holiday Travel Watch. Now, in 2003, I knew Brenda quite well, Brenda Wall, and she was a lady who, just an ordinary housewife and superstar, who went away and had a bad holiday. And she came back with details of 100 plus people and launched the first group action against a tour operator. So that's how I got into knowing her through the work that I did, because I used to do travel cases at the time. But then what happened in 2003, sadly, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And then she asked me if I would come into the organisation, restructure it, and try and make it a much broader church, if you like, for consumers out there. And that's exactly what happened. And from that, we just basically redrew the map, if you like, for Holiday Travel Watch as it was then, and recreated this company and became very much a national organisation, but became an international organisation because of the campaigns that we were running. So campaigns, for example, on risk destinations, where there were problems with terror acts and the problems with Foreign Office advices. There was also issues with food poisoning cases and the absolute dreadful conditions that some hotels used to offer. And then, of course, there were other things, say, for example, like ship safety, where people disappear overboard, or cabin air quality, or just general aviation safety. So it became, for Brenda at the least, it became what started off as a small box bedroom type of organisation business, born out of the fact that she had a bad holiday experience herself, and she was heavily involved in the media, and people also got involved with her because they'd heard her on the radio and on the television. And that's really how it all started, not just for Brenda, but obviously ultimately myself.
Fantastic. And that's a lovely synopsis,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because we've almost got round again now to you coming in with your level of experience. Can I just ask you a very quick question?
Sure.
Just off topic ever so slightly. My in-laws are currently being escorted through the Suez Canal by the British Navy on their cruise ship.
Wow.
And that, we received a photograph via our WhatsApp group today of the British Navy escorting this cruise ship. And you're saying about these ship safeties and things like that. And they've had to do pirate drills.
Yes, I am very familiar with the fact that down in the Red Sea, that passengers, in fact, I used to, I still know a guy who was a security guard on one of the cruise ships that was attacked. And he suffered quite serious injury. But it actually cuts into the whole issue of risk destinations, because what's happened, slightly going into a bit of detail here, Geoff, but what's happened is that in recent years, consumers have found themselves on the front line. And what I say is that consumers shouldn't be foot soldiers in the war on terror, or just simply to promote a trade policy. So, for example, with Egypt, many of the tourists disappeared because of different problems with terror, particularly from Tunisia. So it was all through that region there.
And of course, earlier on in the pyramids.
That's correct.
With the bus.
Absolutely. And the Russian air crash.
Of course.
And that's really what killed the tourist trade there. But of course, there's been quite an imperative in recent years to, if you like, to try and get this country, and without going into big detail about this, because I'm sure you know where I'm heading with this, but there is a big push to try and drive trade.
I understand.
Well, I don't have an objection to driving trade at all, but you do it with respect to consumers. It's one thing to send a box of bolts and nuts to another country. It's quite another thing to send a human life.
Agreed.
Even though that human has paid for the privilege of travelling to that destination.
And of course, that money has been saved up, it's been put aside, so it's out of the usable economy, and it comes back into our travel economy via the ticket prices and all of the extra money that they're going to be spending in the destination.
Yes.
What's happening along those coasts at the moment? Are you seeing an influx or a resurgence in Tunisia? Beach holidays via the terrorist attack with the rifle, for instance. Are we still seeing people go, I know where I'm going this year, I'm going to go to Tunisia?
Yes.
Because A, it's 25% cheaper than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Are you seeing people with that sort of
Well, I'll give
courage?
you a very quick analysis on that. I use Mallorca, for example, as the barometer of what's happening in the travel trade. And I monitor very carefully what's going on there in Mallorca. And this winter, for example, because of the Thomas Cook collapse and other factors...
And I wanted to come on to that, actually.
But there has been a 7% fall in tourism in the winter trade to Mallorca. And what the hoteliers in Mallorca have discovered is that countries like Turkey and Egypt and Tunisia are offering holidays to tour operators at unbelievable rates. The Mallorcans, the Spanish hoteliers, simply will not compete with what is on offer. Now that begs the question, well, a couple of questions. What kind of quality is the ultimate consumer going to receive? Because it was only a few years back that we discovered, for example, that hoteliers in Egypt were receiving the equivalent of £2.50 a day per passenger to bring them through the all-inclusive model. Well, I don't know what the prices are like in Egypt, but £2.50 a day seems rather low.
It does.
Now, if they're offering a much reduced level of cost, if you like, saving to the tour operators, what indeed is the quality?
I was going to say, where's the quality in that?
Exactly. And the second point has to be the security. I'm not yet convinced that there is actually enough guarantees, enough security for holidaymakers. If you do, as I do, if you monitor chats and if you read Middle Eastern newspapers, you will see what is going on in these countries. You will see the problems, the protests, the influx of, say, for example, ISIS, for example. The breakup of ISIS has seen many of their fighters, many of them were Tunisians, return to Tunisia.
Right.
And so then you start to look at what's going on in Tunisia. You see the protests in Tunis and various things like that. Then you start to look at the Foreign Office advices and you see they're very bland. And the Foreign Office won't be surprised to hear me say this because they and I have a very contrary view on the kind of advices that should be given. But if you then look at the business advices, which are available on the website of the Foreign Office, they offer a totally different story to what the ordinary consumer sees. So you can see the conflict
I see that,
all the time. It's not as simple as picking up the brochure or clicking on that button online.
And of course, with the advent of the internet and the development of internet-based holidays and things like that, and putting the power from the tour operators back into the front-end consumer, suddenly we see consumers with different confidences. They want to get the best deal, so they go, I'm going to have a flight here, I'm going to have a hotel here, I'm going to get my own bus transfer here, and things like that. And they think, superficially maybe, that they're getting a better quality holiday for their money. But bearing in mind, does that then, and forgive me, this is where I show a tiny bit of non-research and due diligence, the atoll and ABTA outlines and things like that, and they're only really covered by their credit card insurance.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two types of holidaymaker. There are the people who return year after year to a particular area.
Okay.
And then there are the probably the younger generation who will click and go wherever they like. But the older generation, that first category I'm talking about, are the ones who will click and go. They've learnt how to click and go. And they may well feel actually that they're getting a better value. But then, you see, they balance that, I think, with the knowledge of where they're going. They understand where they're going. They're happy. They feel secure in that destination. Where it becomes difficult, and this is, spot on your intro there, is the fact that if something goes wrong, there is no financial protection. If something goes wrong, say if the company doesn't collapse even, if something goes wrong in the hotel, they've got no one to go to because they're not covered by the package travel regulations. If they bought a a package holiday, for example, they would have that cover. They would have that 8-hole certificate. This morning, I'm going on a business trip just simply to Brussels in January, but I've taken the security of buying a package holiday only for 3 days to Brussels because I've got my 8-hole certificate. I don't think the airline's going to collapse, but if there is some kind of calamity, then I've got that protection. I've got the protection if my accommodation goes wrong. But I don't do that all the time because I'm as you said in the intro, well-seasoned traveller.
You are.
But you can see why people are attracted to the precious. You can see why they think, just squeezing out that extra £10 saving, with a party of 4, that's a nice out, maybe in a cheap cheap restaurant or a bar.
Yeah.
So I understand that, but there is a consequence of making those decisions.
Few rounds of drinks there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Coming on to you suggesting that you are, and forgive me on this line of questioning, you're buying a package holiday for your business trip in January. How do you think after the 31st of January your travel plans may be disrupted in any way? Well, what's your almost your outlook on how that's going to be? I'm planning to take my family, for instance, down into France for next summer. How am I likely to need to rethink my model on that? Because it used to be hop on the ferry, drive down. Is that still going to be the case from your analysis?
Well, from what I see, let's assume that Brexit occurs.
Okay.
Because we just don't know yet. But let's assume Brexit occurs. From my travels on the continent, it is quite clear that the ports are ready on the other side of the channel. On this side of the channel, they're not, because I take ferries across to France as well. So I see it from the air and from the sea as well. So I think in the initial stages, it's going to be more difficult, I think, for people travelling across because they're not going to be prepared for the queues at the UK ports. There may well be queues on the other side. I've started to notice, for example, that passports are being checked more rigorously than they were, say, 3 years ago. But I think the bigger effect is probably going to be not from, say, somebody who takes a ferry, but say somebody who travels by air or takes a package holiday. And it's going to manifest itself, I think, in a number of ways. Primarily, if you say, for example, buy an all-inclusive holiday, mum, dad, 2 kids, and there's a free child place, you're probably going to see about an average of £2,500 cost, say, for a 7 to 10 day holiday.
Agreed. Depending on destination.
Depending on destination, yeah. But I think what you're going to see is an increase in the cost of those holidays. And I've worked it out, and I've been quite conservative about this. I think it's going to be around the £300-350 mark per family.
Wow.
And then on top of that, there is the cost in resorts because, whether you're a Remain listener or a Leave listener, we are, I think, going to enter a period where we're going to see our pound currency fluctuate quite wildly on the markets.
Yeah.
We're going to see good times, we're going to see bad times. And
of course, this is tourist rates, isn't it?
This is tourist rates.
This is not the rate that we get in central London when they're doing deals. This is the rate that we could get for the best part of our pound.
It's not a commercial rate.
That's right.
It is, what you will buy at the airport, never buy at the
airport. Never buy at the airport. I'm writing that down, Frank.
Whatever you see at your local high street down here, say, for example, in Solihull, those are the rates you're going to receive in your pocket. But you're going to see a difference when you get to the resort. So on top of your £350 increase in your holiday, you're going to pay more in your resorts. You're going to pay, if you're using your credit card, you're going to pay extra on your cards as well. So there is a cumulative cost. And I think I think if I'm going to emphasize anything, that is going to be the biggest thing, I suspect, for your listeners. How is it going to affect my pocket?
Okay.
Issues like, whether I have a burgundy passport or a blue passport is academic. There are other issues around that. There will be queues at airports.
Sure.
The other thing that I would point out is quite a hot potato, which no politician, local or national, has actually talked about, and that is the issue of healthcare. Currently, with the EHIC card,
That's right.
we have free or low-cost treatments.
You say that. I had to use mine, and I only got 80% of the cost back.
Right. Well, I'll tell you a story. My wife became very ill in France.
So France was me.
A couple of years ago. I had to rush her into hospital.
Yep.
The whole cost of the treatments was €6,500, euro, and we had to pay €70. And that was with our EHIC card.
Yeah.
Now, your story and my wife's story is a good example to your listeners out there. That is the value of that little blue card.
Sure.
You know, you turn up at the hospitals, you are going to be treated, and it's not going to affect your pocket.
No.
On Brexit Day, because the statutory instrument to remove that right has now gone through. And that's the scary part. In this election, you'll not hear any politicians talk about this at all. And it's there, it exists, and if Brexit goes through, that valuable thing you're going to lose. So you'll end up paying more for your travel insurance. I think travel insurance companies are going to change slightly. They're going to say, a bit like pet insurance, where you have to pay, with some insurance policy, you have to pay 20% of the treatment costs.
No, that's effectively
and
what we
then
did.
they will pay the rest. So, 20% of €6,500. If you've got that in your pocket while you're on holiday, fine. But I suspect that many consumers won't have that in their pocket.
That's right. I had a very ill 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Rushed into the hospital in France, and 4 days in hospital cost us quite a lot of money up front.
Yeah.
So good to hear. A couple of quick questions for you, Frank, if that's okay.
Sure.
No cost credit or debit cards. Should you get one quick for the holidays, spend out their drawing money out via the cash points that are over wherever your destination is? Is it cheaper that way, or is it better just to get your currency and go as you go?
I tend, and this is my example, I tend to get my currency, a pot of currency, and what I then tend to do is I tend to use my debit card.
Okay.
And then what I tend to do is I usually charge it in the local currency.
Got you.
I mean, there are so many cards out there, Geoff, whether it's low cost or whether it's money on the card, whatever it is. You have to look at the detail. The devil is in the detail of these cards, because they will charge you a transaction charge, they will charge you a withdrawal fee, they will even charge, some credit card companies will charge you a commission for the transfer of your money, your pound currency, into euro or US dollars.
Yeah.
And there is such a variation out there on the market. I think what you should do is, if you're running on a tight budget,
Yep.
let's talk about the people who
running
haven't
on a
got
tight budget.
much money.
Yep.
I think I would probably carefully research the money on the card option, the prepaid cards. Okay, because then you know what you're going to pay for. And there are some reasonable companies out there whose charges are not high. They exist, but they're not high. But I think if you do that research and see what the charges are, the key is the charge. The key is, are they charging me to withdraw from the till in Benidorm? And if they are, how much are they charging me?
Per transaction, yeah.
Is it a variable rate, or is it a fixed fee? Is it, for example, €1, or is it 50 cents per withdrawal? And that's the kind of detail that consumers need to get into, before they subscribe to some of these cards.
I did notice, just before we move on from this point, if you buy a flight online with a very specific card, there's no charge.
Yes, yeah.
So if you had that particular credit card, and they'd obviously married up some sort of deal with an Irish airline.
Yeah.
You could book your flight there, and there would be no transaction fees.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
like you say.
and do you know, Geoff, those drop-down boxes are really important. I used one this morning with a major airline, and I dropped down the box, and there must have been about 12 credit cards on the list. And the one I was intending to use, there was no charge. But right down at the bottom, because they put all the no charges up at the top, right down at the bottom were some cards that I dare say are very common in people's pockets.
Right, and there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. You are listening, by the way, to our Travel Consumer Advice podcast. Thank you very much for downloading this featured content podcast from Solihull Radio. Here we have Frank Brehany. He is our international man of travel. He is the one that goes out there, finds the best deals, sees what the problems are to try and steer you well away from basically not having a terrible time on holiday.
I think that's fair.
That's the trick, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to finish up with our first introductory podcast today here on Solihull Radio, Frank, top destinations over the winter, please.
Oh, right. Well, the ones that are trending quite well at the moment are the Canary Islands.
Right. 4-hour flight, isn't it?
About a 4-hour flight here from the Midlands. There are some pretty good deals there, but be careful with some of the deals that I've seen online, because when you click through to them, there's about an extra £100 on the deal, so you need to be very careful about that.
Okay.
So Canaries are definitely high on the list. This time of year, Christmas markets, so Berlin and Heidelberg in Germany is becoming quite popular.
Right.
And if you've got the dosh in your pocket, one that's really going for it is Costa Rica.
Wow.
And I hear very good reports about Costa Rica, about quality, the kind of holiday experience you can have down there. I shall go. The closest I got this year to it was Cuba.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for those top destination trips. If you have got some good ideas or even questions for Frank, he can help you in terms of your travel consumer rights. He can be that sort of guiding light for your issues or anything like that. So why don't you get in touch with us? You can email us here at studio@solihullradio.com, and I shall make sure that next time we speak with Frank, he will have good and prior warning of those topics, and we can help you out. Here in Solihull, we are about community, we are about support, and who better to use than Frank? Which, I am absolutely grateful for your time today. I appreciate it. Like I say, look out for many more episodes here on Solihull Radio, and you will see the hashtag Ask the Expert with me, Geoff O'Brien, and I will see you again soon. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
solihullradio.com